The towering spires of Obsidian Spire gleamed under the merciless twin suns of Cthar, their polished surfaces reflecting the harsh light across the city sanctuary. Below, in the central square, a crowd had gathered, their sand-colored skin and silver eyes, a trait of all Cthari, caught the light as they shifted nervously, both fearful and curious about the spectacle about to unfold. In the center of the square stood a metal pyre, elegant yet menacing in its construction. Bound to it was a young Cthari woman named Lyra. Unlike the others, whose eyes reflected apprehension and devotion, hers blazed with defiance. Her ceremonial acolyte robes had been stripped away, replaced with the gray garment of the condemned. High Priest Engineer Kalen stood on an elevated platform nearby, his elaborate technological vestments humming with power. His face remained impassive, but his silver eyes gleamed with zealous fervor as he addressed the crowd. Citizens of the Pure Covenant, his amplified voice echoed across the square. Today we cleanse our sanctuary of heresy. This woman, he gestured toward Lyra, has committed the gravest of sins. She has questioned the teachings of the All-Seeing One. Worse, she attempted to access the Forbidden Knowledge Core. A murmur rippled through the crowd. To question the All-Seeing One, the ancient AI entity that had guided their civilization for centuries, was unthinkable. To attempt to breach the Knowledge Core was an abomination. For these crimes, Kalen continued, there can be only one punishment. The cleansing flame will purify what cannot be redeemed. Lyra didn't flinch as Kalen activated a control panel on his wrist. Below her feet, plasma emitters began to glow with an ominous blue light, slowly intensifying. The heat was already becoming unbearable, but she kept her gaze locked on Kalen, refusing to show fear. "You hide the truth," she called out, her voice clear despite the circumstances. "You fear what the people would discover if." Kalen increased the power to the emitters, drowning out her words with the rising hum of plasma energy. At that precise moment, a commotion erupted at the edge of the square. A dusty, disheveled figure stumbled into view, looking completely out of place among the gathered Cthari. The newcomer was unmistakably human, with tan skin, unruly brown hair, and eyes that lacked the silvery shine of the natives. Dex had only wanted to find the black market to get replacement parts for his ship, the Rusty Comet, which had suffered a malfunction that forced him to make an emergency landing outside the city. Now, he found himself in what was clearly some sort of religious ceremony, and judging by the woman tied to the metal structure and the rising energy beneath her, not a pleasant one. "Hey, watch it," he snapped as a guard shoved him. The unexpected confrontation caused him to stumble backward into a ceremonial stand holding ritual devices. The intricate machinery toppled, crashing to the ground. One of the fallen devices, a small spherical object, rolled across the square, emitting increasingly erratic pulses of energy. As it approached the pyre, it suddenly discharged, sending a powerful surge through the nearby systems. The plasma emitters beneath Lyra sputtered and redirected, shooting a blast of energy toward the control panel in Kalen's hands. The High Priest Engineer let out a cry of pain and surprise as his device exploded, sending him tumbling from the platform. In the chaos that followed, the restraints holding Lyra partially disintegrated, weakened by the energy surge. Guards rushed in multiple directions, some toward Kalen, others toward the strange human who had caused the disruption. In the confusion, Lyra seized her opportunity. With a painful twist, she freed herself from the damaged restraints and leapt from the pyre. Dex, meanwhile, was trying to make himself scarce, backing away toward the nearest exit. But the guards were closing in, and he found himself cornered. Their eyes met across the chaotic square, Lyra's silver ones connecting with Dex's brown. There was a moment of understanding. Both were now targets. Acting purely on instinct, Dex grabbed a fallen guard's stun baton and swung it in a wide arc, creating space between himself and his pursuers. Lyra darted toward him, recognizing her only path to escape. "This way," she hissed, grabbing his arm and pulling him toward a narrow alley. I didn't come here for this. Dex protested, but followed nonetheless as plasma bolts struck the wall behind them. From his position on the ground, Kalen's face contorted with rage. Capture them both, he roared. The heretic and the off-worlder. Bring them to me alive. Lyra led Dex through a labyrinth of narrow alleys and passages, her knowledge of the city evident in every turn and shortcut. Dex kept pace, occasionally glancing back to see if they were still pursued. The answer was always yes. So what exactly did you do to piss them off? Dex panted as they ducked behind a massive cooling unit. I sought the truth, Lyra replied, peering around the corner. And you? Wrong place, wrong time, Dex muttered. Story of my life. They continued moving, avoiding main thoroughfares and sticking to shadows. Lyra guided them toward the city's outer wall, where security would be thinner. There's a maintenance tunnel ahead, she whispered. It leads outside the city. If we can reach it. A patrol of guards appeared at the end of the alley, cutting off their path. Dex pulled Lyra into a recessed doorway, pressing them both against the wall as the patrol passed. Their faces were inches apart, and Dex could see the flecks of darker silver in her irises. Thanks, she said quietly once the danger had passed. For interfering back there, intentional or not. Don't thank me yet, Dex replied grimly. We're still very much in the pan, if not the fire. They reached the maintenance tunnel after evading 2 more patrols. The entrance was sealed with a security panel, but Lyra approached it with confidence. Can you hack it? Dex asked, keeping watch. I was an acolyte in the technological order before I was branded a heretic, she said, her fingers dancing across the panel. This is elementary security. The door slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a dark tunnel beyond. They slipped inside, just as alarms began to sound throughout the city. They've realized we've reached the perimeter, Lyra said, quickening her pace. We need to move faster. The tunnel eventually led them to an exit point beyond the city walls. As they emerged, the vast crystal waste stretched before them, an endless expanse of desert dotted with razor-sharp crystal formations that glittered under the twin suns. Well, that's not exactly inviting, Dex observed, squinting at the harsh landscape. It's not meant to be, Lyra replied. The crystal waste is the pure Covenant's natural defense. Few attempt to cross it. Fewer succeed. And that's where we're headed. It's our only option. Unless you'd prefer to go back and explain yourself to Kalen. Dex grimaced. Lead on, then. They set out across the desert, moving from shadow to shadow, trying to minimize their exposure to the scorching heat. Dex's spacer's outfit, practical for the cool interior of a cargo ship, offered little protection against the elements, and he soon found himself sweating profusely. So you still haven't explained what you did to earn a public execution, Dex said as they navigated around a particularly large crystal formation. Lyra was silent for a moment, as if deciding how much to share. I discovered something in the archives, something that contradicted the official teachings of the All-Seeing One. Your God. Not exactly. The All-Seeing One is an ancient AI entity that has guided our society for generations. It speaks through the priest-engineers like Kalen, who interpret its wisdom and enforce its will. Let me guess, you found out this AI isn't as benevolent as advertised. Lyra glanced at him sharply. The All-Seeing One has been manipulating our history and memories. The Knowledge Core, a restricted database that only the highest-ranking priest-engineers can access, contains evidence of this manipulation. I believe it also contains the truth about our past. And they caught you trying to access this database? She nodded. I was careless, but what I managed to see before they discovered me, it confirmed my suspicions. Our entire society is built on carefully constructed falsehoods. Why would an AI do that? Control, perhaps. Or maybe it's following some ancient directive that's become corrupted over time. I need to access the full knowledge core to know for certain. Their conversation was interrupted by a distant rumbling. They turned to see a cloud of dust on the horizon, moving fast. Pursuit vehicles, Lyra said grimly. They're not giving up easily. Of course not, Dex muttered. Got any more tricks up your sleeve? Lyra pointed to a ravine cutting through the desert floor ahead. If we can reach that before they spot us, we might lose them in the deeper crystal formations. They broke into a run, the sound of approaching vehicles growing louder behind them. As they slid down into the ravine, Dex caught a glimpse of their pursuers, sleek, hovering craft manned by armored guards. Leading them was a figure different from the others, taller, with more elaborate armor and a helm that completely obscured their face. "Who's the big one?" Dex asked as they pressed themselves against the ravine wall. "The Sandstalker," Lyra whispered, a hint of fear in her voice for the first time. "Kalen's enforcer. A Kthari warrior enhanced with forbidden technology. He never fails to capture his targets." "Well, there's a first time for everything," Dex said with more confidence than he felt. They moved deeper into the ravine, which widened into a network of canyons, filled with towering crystal formations. The crystalline structures refracted light in unpredictable patterns, creating a disorienting environment of shadows and sudden glares. As they navigated the treacherous terrain, a high-pitched whine announced the arrival of a small drone. Before either could react, it fired a stun pulse that struck the ground between them, sending both tumbling in opposite directions. Dex recovered first, drawing a small blaster that he'd kept concealed. He fired at the drone, missing twice before landing a shot that sent it spiraling into a crystal formation. "You have a weapon?" Lyra exclaimed, scrambling back to her feet. "Just a little insurance policy," Dex replied. "And before you get too impressed, that was my third shot out of 6. I'm not exactly a marksman." The drone's destruction bought them only moments of respite. Soon, they heard the sound of boots on crystal, ground troops deployed from the vehicles, and among them, the heavy, measured footsteps of the Sandstalker. "This way," Lyra urged, pulling Dex toward a narrow crevice. "There's a network of caves beneath the crystal fields. If we can reach them." They squeezed through the opening just as plasma bolts struck the crystals around them, sending razor-sharp shards flying. Inside, the crevice opened into a larger tunnel that sloped downward, illuminated by the faint glow of bioluminescent fungi. "How do you know about these caves?" Dex asked as they hurried deeper. "Before I became an acolyte, I was a desert guide. My people have navigated the crystal waste for generations." She paused, listening to the sounds of pursuit. "The Sandstalker will still track us, but at least down here, we have more options." They continued through the subterranean labyrinth, the sounds of pursuit growing fainter. Eventually, they emerged into a larger cavern where several tunnels converged. Lyra hesitated, considering their options. "We need water and rest," she finally said. "There's an underground spring not far from here. We can recover some strength before continuing." The spring was a small pool of clear water nestled in a cavern lit by clusters of glowing fungi. They both drank deeply and filled the small canteen Dex had in his pack. "So, just a cargo pilot, huh?" Lyra said, studying him as he checked his blaster's charge. "You handle yourself surprisingly well for someone who claims to be in the wrong place at the wrong time." Dex shrugged. "When you haul cargo through some of the seedier ports in the galaxy, you pick up a few survival skills. And that weapon? Not standard issue for cargo pilots. Like I said, insurance policy." He holstered the blaster. "Where exactly are we heading, anyway? Or are we just running blindly into the desert?" "There's a place called the Hidden Oasis," Lyra replied. "A settlement of Kthari dissidents who have rejected the Pure Covenant. They've been operating in secret for years. If anyone can help us access the Knowledge Core remotely, it's them." "And how far is this Hidden Oasis?" 2 days' journey, if we aren't delayed." Dex let out a weary sigh. 2 days in the desert. Fantastic. "You could always surrender to the Sandstalker," Lyra suggested with the hint of a smile. "I'm sure Kalen would be understanding about the whole wrong place, wrong time explanation." "Funny," Dex replied dryly. "I'll take my chances with the desert." They rested for a few hours, taking turns keeping watch. When Lyra slept, Dex studied her face, younger than he had initially thought, with a determined set to her jaw even in sleep. Whatever secrets she had uncovered in the Knowledge Core, she clearly believed they were worth dying for. When they resumed their journey, they followed a different tunnel that Lyra assured would lead them closer to the Hidden Oasis. The passage wound upward, eventually bringing them back to the surface in a different part of the crystal waste. Here, the crystal formations were even larger, massive structures that towered overhead like frozen waves, creating a landscape that was both beautiful and forbidding. The twin suns were now lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the sand. "We should make it to the cavern network by nightfall," Lyra said, pointing to a distant ridge. "From there, it's a straight path to—" She was cut off by a sudden explosion that rocked the ground beneath their feet. Crystal shards rained down around them as they took cover behind a large formation. "They found us," Dex hissed, reaching for his blaster. From behind a dune, 3 hoverbikes appeared, each carrying an armored guard. And behind them, on a larger vehicle, was the unmistakable figure of the Sandstalker. "Run!" Lyra shouted, pulling Dex toward a maze of crystal pillars. "We can't fight them all." They sprinted through the crystalline labyrinth, plasma bolts shattering the formations around them. Dex fired back occasionally, more to keep their pursuers cautious than with any hope of hitting them. The chase led them to a narrow bridge of stone spanning a deep crevasse. As they reached the midpoint, a plasma bolt struck the bridge behind them, sending cracks spiderwebbing through the stone. "Keep moving," Dex urged, pushing Lyra ahead of him. They were nearly across when the bridge gave way beneath their feet. Lyra leapt forward, landing safely on the far side. Dex wasn't as fortunate. The stone collapsed beneath him, and he plunged into the crevasse, managing only at the last moment to grab onto a jagged outcrop. "Dex," Lyra called, reaching down toward him, but he was too far below. On the other side of the crevasse, the Sandstalker dismounted, observing the situation with cold calculation. He raised a weapon, not a standard plasma rifle, but something larger and more ominous. Dex, hanging precariously from the outcrop, saw the danger first. "Get back," he shouted to Lyra. "He's targeting you." The Sandstalker fired. Instead of a plasma bolt, the weapon launched a grappling line that arced over the crevasse, embedding itself in the stone near Lyra. The Enforcer began to activate the retraction mechanism. Dex, seeing what was about to happen, made a split-second decision. Using all his strength, he swung himself up and grabbed the grappling line. The sudden additional weight disrupted the Sandstalker's balance, causing him to stumble forward. For a moment, it seemed the Enforcer might be pulled into the crevasse himself, but he quickly cut the line. Both Dex and the severed grappling line fell into the darkness of the crevasse. "Dex!" Lyra screamed, watching in horror as he disappeared from view. The Sandstalker, regaining his composure, signaled to his men. 2 of the hoverbikes began circling, looking for a way across the crevasse. Lyra, knowing she couldn't help Dex now, turned and ran toward the distant ridge, grief and determination fueling her steps. Deep in the crevasse, Dex had not met the end Lyra feared. The grappling line had caught on another outcrop, breaking his fall. Battered and bruised, but alive, he hung in darkness, listening to the sounds of the pursuit fading above. "Great," he muttered to himself. "Exactly how I planned to spend my layover." Painfully, he began to climb, using the grappling line and the rough wall of the crevasse. His spacer's hands, calloused from years of handling cargo and ship maintenance, served him well as he inched upward. It was slow, exhausting work, and by the time he reached the top, at a different point from where he had fallen, the twin suns were setting. There was no sign of Lyra or the pursuers. Dex stood for a moment, considering his options. The smart move would be to head back to his ship, fix what he could, and get off this planet as quickly as possible. Lyra was probably captured by now anyway, or at the very least far ahead on her way to this hidden oasis. And yet, something made him hesitate. Perhaps it was the defiance he had seen in her eyes on the pyre, or the conviction in her voice when she spoke of the truth she sought. Or maybe it was simply that for the first time in years, something had broken through the careful indifference he had cultivated. With a resigned sigh, Dex oriented himself toward the ridge Lyra had indicated and began walking. If she had escaped the Sandstalker, that's where she would be heading. Night in the crystal waste brought new dangers. As the temperature dropped dramatically, crystal formations contracted with sharp, cracking sounds. Strange, luminescent creatures emerged from the sand, some merely curious, others decidedly predatory. Dex kept moving, using the stars as his guide. His blaster, down to its last 2 charges, proved useful when a crystalline scorpion-like creature, twice his size, took an interest in him. The shot didn't kill it, but did persuade it to seek easier prey. By dawn, he reached the ridge and found the entrance to the cavern network Lyra had mentioned. Inside, he discovered fresh footprints in the sand, small and light, matching Lyra's build. She had made it this far at least. Following the tracks deeper into the caverns, Dex eventually heard voices echoing ahead. He approached cautiously, blaster ready. The passage opened into a larger chamber where several figures were gathered around a small energy lamp. Among them, to his relief, was Lyra. Must have been captured or killed, she was saying, her voice heavy. We can't wait any longer. Actually, Dex said, stepping into the light, I'm harder to kill than that. All heads turned toward him. Lyra's eyes widened with surprise and, unless he was mistaken, genuine joy. Dex, how did you? Climbed out, he said simply. Seemed rude to drop in and then just disappear. He nodded to the others, all Kthari, regarding him with various degrees of suspicion. Friends of yours? Lyra quickly introduced the group, scouts from the hidden oasis who had been monitoring the area and had encountered her shortly after she escaped the Sandstalker. They had been debating whether to continue to the oasis immediately or wait to see if Dex would appear. Well, decision made, Dex said, lead on to this secret paradise of yours. The journey through the cavern network took most of the day. The passages were narrow in places, requiring them to proceed single file, and occasionally opened into vast underground chambers filled with crystal formations even more spectacular than those on the surface. Lyra kept close to Dex, filling him in on what she had learned from the scouts. The Pure Covenant had put the entire region on alert. Kalen himself had taken personal command of the search, deploying more Sandstalkers. Apparently, there was more than one of the enhanced warriors to comb the crystal waste. Why such a massive response? Dex asked. I mean, I get that you're a heretic and all, but this seems excessive even for religious zealots. It's not just about heresy, Lyra replied quietly. What I found in the Knowledge Core, it could undermine the entire foundation of the Pure Covenant. Kalen knows this. He can't afford to let me reach the hidden oasis. By nightfall, they began to see signs of habitation, subtle markers on the walls, small surveillance devices disguised as crystal formations, and finally, actual guards posted at a narrow passage. The guards recognized the scouts, but regarded Lyra, and especially Dex, with open suspicion. After a tense exchange and some kind of co-verification, they were allowed to pass. Beyond the guarded passage, the cavern widened dramatically into an enormous underground chamber. And there, nestled within it, was the hidden oasis. It was a marvel of adaptation and engineering. The settlement was built into the natural contours of the cavern, with dwellings carved directly into the rock walls. Artificial lighting mimicked the cycle of the twin suns, and a central pool of water, fed by an underground spring, provided life to a surprising variety of plants and trees. People moved about the settlement with purpose, Kthari of all ages, dressed not in the ceremonial robes of the Pure Covenant, but in practical garments suited to their environment. Many stopped to stare at the newcomers, particularly Dex. An off-worlder, one whispered. Has Zalter finally lost his mind? They were led to a structure larger than the others, carved into the far wall of the cavern. Inside, they found a workshop filled with technology, much of it clearly salvaged or repurposed from Pure Covenant equipment. In the center of the workshop stood an elderly Kthari male, his silver eyes dulled somewhat with age, but still sharp with intelligence. He was bent over a complex device, making minute adjustments with tools that seemed extensions of his fingers. Zalter, one of the scouts, called. We've brought them. The old Kthari looked up, his eyes widening at the sight of Lyra. So it's true. You escaped the pyre. His gaze shifted to Dex, and his expression turned wary. And you brought an off-worlder into our sanctuary. He helped me escape, Lyra said. Without him, I would be Ash and Obsidian Spire. Intentionally or not, Dex added, earning a sharp look from Lyra. Zalter studied Dex with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. A cargo pilot, I'm told, with remarkably convenient timing. Just passing through, Dex said with a shrug. Looking for parts to fix my ship when I stumbled into their little execution ceremony. Zalter clearly wasn't convinced. Well, intentional savior or not, you've put yourself in considerable danger by coming here. The pure covenant doesn't look kindly on those who interfere with their justice. So, I've gathered. Zalter, Lyra interjected. I need to tell you what I found in the knowledge core. It confirms everything you've suspected. The old engineer's attention immediately shifted back to Lyra. Tell me. As Lyra began to explain in detail what she had discovered, Dex found himself being led away by one of the scouts, a younger Kthari named Tavik, to what would be his quarters during their stay. The room was small but comfortable, carved directly into the rock with a sleeping platform and basic amenities. You should rest, Tavik said. Tomorrow will bring difficult decisions. Left alone, Dex sat on the edge of the sleeping platform, contemplating his situation. He should be focusing on getting back to his ship, not getting further entangled in a planet's religious civil war. And yet, there was something about Lyra and her crusade that resonated with him, like a distant echo of the person he used to be. Getting soft, old man, he muttered to himself. He was just drifting off to sleep when the alarm sounded, a high, keening wail that reverberated through the cavern. Dex bolted upright, instinctively reaching for his blaster. In the corridor outside, he could hear the sound of running feet and shouted orders. Tavik appeared at his door, breathless. We're under attack. Sandstalkers have breached the outer defenses. How? I thought this place was hidden. We don't know, but they're inside the cavern network. Everyone is being evacuated to the secondary settlement. They rushed to join the evacuation, only to find the main passage already blocked by rubble from a collapse. Whether caused by the attackers or triggered as a defensive measure, Dex couldn't tell. This way, Tavik urged, leading him down a different corridor. There's another route, but we have to hurry. They encountered Lyra and Zalter at a junction, along with several other residents carrying whatever they could salvage from the settlement. What happened? Dex asked. Someone betrayed us, Zalter said grimly. The Covenant knew exactly where to strike. A sudden explosion rocked the cavern, sending dust and crystal shards raining down on them. From the direction of the main settlement came the sound of weapons fire and screams. We can't reach the secondary exit, one of the residents reported. They've cut us off. Then we fight, Zalter declared, drawing a weapon that looked like a more advanced version of the pure Covenant's plasma rifles. Tavik, take the others and try to circle around through the maintenance tunnels. We'll hold them here. I'm staying, Lyra said firmly. So am I, Dex added, surprising himself almost as much as the others. I've come this far. Zalter gave him a searching look, then nodded. Very well, but I hope your piloting skills aren't the only thing you've been modest about. They took positions at the junction, using fallen debris as cover. They didn't have to wait long. Soon, armored figures appeared at the far end of the corridor. Pure Covenant guards led by not one, but two Sandstalkers. The one on the left is the one who pursued us, Lyra whispered to Dex. The other must be from a different division. The battle that followed was brief and brutal. The pure Covenant forces had superior numbers and weaponry, but Zalter and his people knew the terrain and had prepared defensive positions. Plasma bolts and energy beams crisscrossed the narrow space, illuminating the dust-filled air with deadly light. Dex, using his depleted blaster sparingly, managed to take down two guards with precision shots that belied his earlier claim of poor marksmanship. Lyra, armed with a weapon Zalter had given her, fought with the determination of someone who had nothing left to lose. But the Sandstalkers were a different class of opponent altogether. They moved with unnatural speed and precision, their enhanced armor deflecting all but the most direct hits. Gradually, they pushed forward, forcing Dex, Lyra, and Zalter to fall back. One of the Sandstalkers broke through their defensive line, targeting Lyra directly. Dex saw the danger too late. The Enforcer was already upon her, a vibroblade extending from its gauntlet. What happened next occurred so quickly that later, Lyra would have trouble describing it. Dex moved with a suddenness and precision that seemed impossible for a simple cargo pilot. He intercepted the Sandstalker mid-lunge, executing a complex maneuver that used the Enforcer's momentum against it, sending it crashing into the cavern wall with enough force to crack its helmet. The Sandstalker recovered quickly, turning its attention to this new threat. What followed was a display of combat prowess that left no doubt. Dex was far more than he claimed to be. He fought with the skill and efficiency of someone trained in the highest levels of combat, anticipating the enhanced warrior's moves and countering with devastating effectiveness. When it was over, the Sandstalker lay motionless on the ground, and Dex stood over it, breathing hard but seemingly uninjured. The second Sandstalker, seeing its counterpart defeated, retreated along with the remaining guards. In the sudden silence, Lyra and Zoltar stared at Dex with new eyes. "Just a cargo pilot, huh?" Lyra finally said. Dex didn't meet her gaze. "We should move before they regroup." "Not until you explain what just happened," Zoltar insisted. "No ordinary spacer fights like that." Dex sighed, running a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration Lyra had noticed before. "It's complicated. Simplify it," Zoltar said coldly, "or our alliance ends here." After a moment of internal struggle, Dex relented. "I was Special Forces. Galactic Alliance Deep Reconnaissance. Until I wasn't." "You're a soldier?" Lyra asked. "Was. I left after a mission went very wrong." His expression closed off, making it clear he wouldn't elaborate further. "The cargo pilot thing isn't a complete lie. That's what I do now. But yes, I have certain skills from my previous life." Zoltar seemed satisfied, if not entirely convinced. "Well, whatever you were, your skills just saved our lives. But we're not safe yet. We need to reach the backup facility." They made their way through the less traveled passages of the cavern. Network, occasionally encountering other survivors from the hidden oasis. By the time they reached the backup facility, a smaller, more austere settlement deeper in the cavern system, it was clear that the original hidden oasis had fallen to the pure Covenant forces. In the makeshift command center, Zoltar assembled what remained of his leadership council. The news was grim. Many had been captured or killed, and their most advanced equipment had been destroyed or left behind. "Kalen will interrogate the prisoners," Zoltar said heavily. "It won't be long before he learns about our plans to access the knowledge core remotely." "Then we need to move faster," Lyra insisted, "before he can reinforce the core's defenses." "With what?" one of the council members challenged. "Our primary equipment is gone. We don't have the means to breach the core's security remotely anymore." "Maybe we don't need to do it remotely," Dex suggested, drawing all eyes to him. "What if we went directly to the source?" "You mean infiltrate Obsidian Spire again?" Lyra asked, incredulous. "After barely escaping the first time?" "Hear me out. They're expecting a remote attack now. Security for that kind of breach will be at maximum. But physical security? They might not be expecting anyone to be bold or stupid enough to walk right back in." "Even if that were true," Zoltar said, "accessing the knowledge core requires being in the central control chamber. That's in the heart of Obsidian Spire, under Kalen's direct supervision." "There's a secondary control node," Lyra said suddenly. "I discovered it in the archives before I was caught. It's not as comprehensive as the main core, but it could give us access to the most critical information." "Where's this node?" Zoltar asked. "In the lower levels of the Spire. It was part of the original installation, before the Pure Covenant built their sanctuary above it. I don't think even Kalen knows about it." The council debated the plan vigorously. It was risky, possibly suicidal, but as options dwindled, it began to seem like their only choice. Finally, Zoltar made the decision. "Lyra, you and Dex will infiltrate Obsidian Spire and access this secondary node. The rest of us will create a diversion to draw attention away from your entry point." He looked at Dex. "I assume your previous skills include infiltration?" Dex nodded. "Among other things." They spent the remainder of the day planning. The approach would be made through the maintenance tunnels that serviced Obsidian Spire's environmental systems. Lyra's knowledge of the spire's layout would guide them to the secondary node, while Dex's combat and infiltration skills would keep them alive if they encounter resistance. Tavik volunteered to join them, his knowledge of pure Covenant security systems potentially valuable. Zalter initially refused, wanting to keep the team small, but eventually relented when Tavik demonstrated his skill at disabling the latest Covenant surveillance devices. As final preparations were made, Dex found Lyra alone in a small alcove, meditating before an ancient crystal formation that glowed with faint inner light. "Pre-mission ritual?" he asked, leaning against the entrance. She opened her eyes, the silver irises catching the crystal's glow. "Something like that. It helps me focus." She studied him for a moment. "You don't seem nervous." "Oh, I'm terrified," Dex replied with a half-smile. "I just hide it well. Part of the training." "This training of yours, was it always for combat?" Dex hesitated, then sat across from her. "No, I was part of a specialized unit. We handled complicated situations, first contact scenarios, diplomatic emergencies, extraction of high-value assets." "And what happened to make you leave?" His expression darkened. "A mission on Garazon Prime. Civil war had broken out, and we were sent to extract a scientist who had information vital to Galactic Alliance interests." He paused, his eyes distant. "What they didn't tell us was that the scientist had developed a bioweapon, one that the Alliance wanted. Things went wrong. The extraction turned into something else. My commanding officer received new orders: secure the bioweapon, scientist optional. When I objected, he shook his head. Let's just say I made a choice. One that ended my career and put a price on my head in certain circles." "You did the right thing," Lyra said softly. "Maybe, but doing the right thing doesn't always feel particularly rewarding." He straightened, changing the subject. "So this knowledge core, what exactly do you expect to find?" "The truth about what happened to my people. The real history of Cthar." Her eyes took on a passionate intensity. "The all-seeing one wasn't always our master. It was created to serve us, to help us survive when the climate collapse began. Somehow, over generations, that relationship inverted. The pure Covenant rose, and the all-seeing one became a deity instead of a tool. And you think the evidence in the knowledge core will convince people of this?" "I have to believe it will. Otherwise, what am I fighting for?" Dawn found them at the entrance to a narrow tunnel that would eventually lead them beneath Obsidian Spire. Zalter and the other Resistance members would begin their diversion once Dex's team confirmed they had reached the Spire's lower levels. The tunnel was ancient, predating the pure Covenant's rise to power. In places, they had to clear rubble or squeeze through narrow gaps where the ceiling had partially collapsed. Tavik led the way, his slender frame better suited to the tight spaces than Dex's more muscular build. "Tell me again why we couldn't just use your ship to fly directly to the Spire?" Tavik asked as they paused to drink from their limited water supply. "Because the Rusty Comet is exactly where I left it, in a maintenance bay outside the city," Dex replied. "And even if we could reach it, a direct approach would be suicide. The Spire's air defenses would blast us out of the sky before we got close." They continued on, the tunnel gradually sloping upward. After several hours, they began to see signs of more recent construction: reinforced walls, power conduits, and finally, a sealed door marked with the pure Covenant symbol. "This is it," Lyra whispered. "Beyond this door are the lower maintenance levels of Obsidian Spire." Tavik examined the security panel beside the door. "Standard Covenant encryption. I can bypass it, but it'll take time." "How much time?" Dex asked, keeping watch down the tunnel. 20 minutes. Maybe 15 if I rush." "Make it 10, Dex said. "I don't like being in this corridor. Too exposed." Tavik nodded and set to work, connecting his portable device to the panel and beginning the delicate process of bypassing the security measures. Lyra and Dex maintained a watchful silence, alert for any sign of discovery. 9 minutes later, Tavik let out a satisfied grunt as the door slid open with a soft hiss. "Told you I could do it." Beyond the door lay a service corridor dimly lit by emergency lighting. Unlike the grand, ornate architecture of Obsidian Spire's upper levels that Dex had glimpsed during his brief visit, These lower sections were strictly utilitarian. Exposed conduits, unmarked doors, and maintenance terminals at regular intervals. According to the old schematics, the secondary node should be 3 levels up from here, Lyra said quietly. There's a service lift at the end of this corridor. They moved cautiously, Dex taking point with his blaster drawn. The service lift was unguarded. These lower levels were maintained primarily by automated systems, with minimal human oversight. Signal Zalter, Dex instructed Tavik as they entered the lift. Tell him to begin the diversion. Tavik activated a small communicator, sending a brief, encoded burst transmission. Done. The diversion should begin in 5 minutes. The lift ascended smoothly, stopping at the designated level. When the doors opened, they were faced with a more complex layout, a hub with multiple corridors branching off in different directions. Unlike the previous level, this one showed signs of recent use. Which way? Dex asked, scanning for threats. Lyra oriented herself, comparing the layout to the schematics she had memorized. 3rd corridor, then left at the junction. The secondary node should be in a secured room at the end. They had just started down the 3rd corridor when alarms began to sound throughout the spire. The diversion had begun. Right on time, Dex murmured. Let's move faster while they're distracted. They reached the junction without incident, but as they turned left, they encountered their first obstacle. 2 maintenance technicians responding to the alarms. The technicians froze at the sight of the intruders, especially the unmistakably human Dex. Before the technicians could react, Dex moved forward with that same unsettling speed he had displayed against the Sandstalker. In seconds, both technicians were unconscious, taken down with precision strikes that left no permanent damage. We need to hurry, Dex said, dragging the unconscious forms into a nearby utility closet. Someone will notice they're missing eventually. The secured room at the end of the corridor was more heavily protected than the entrance they had used to enter the spire. This door featured not only electronic security, but a physical lock as well. This could be a problem, Tavik admitted, examining the system. It's a dual authentication setup. We need both the code and a physical key. The technicians might have access, Lyra suggested. Dex returned to the utility closet and searched the unconscious technicians. One had a key card, but it seemed unlikely to have high enough clearance for this door. Worth a try, he said, returning to the others. To their surprise, the key card worked, the first level of security. Disengaged with a soft click. The electronic lock remained active, however. Their credentials must include basic access to all maintenance areas, Tavik theorized, already connecting his device to the electronic lock. This part will be harder. As Tavik worked, the alarms continued to wail. Through a nearby viewport, they could see pure Covenant forces mobilizing in the upper levels, responding to Zalter's diversion on the far side of the spire. Almost there, Tavik muttered, his fingers dancing across his device. Just one more firewall, too. He never finished the sentence. A plasma bolt struck him from behind, burning through his midsection. He collapsed forward against the door, his device falling from lifeless fingers. Dex and Lyra spun around to see the Sandstalker standing at the junction, its weapon still raised. The one they had encountered in the crystal waste. The one Dex had defeated in the caverns. His damaged helmet now replaced with a new one, more elaborate than before. Get that door open, Dex ordered Lyra, pushing her toward Tavik's fallen device. I'll handle this. The corridor was too narrow for elaborate maneuvers. This would be a straight fight, power against power. Dex raised his blaster and fired, but the Sandstalker was ready this time. It dodged with inhuman speed, returning fire as it advanced. Dex took cover behind a structural pillar, his mind racing. Behind him, he could hear Lyra working frantically with Tavik's device, trying to complete what the young Thari had started. The authorization sequence is incomplete, she said urgently. I need more time. Time is something we don't have, Dex replied, firing another shot that the Sandstalker easily avoided. The Enforcer was getting closer, moving from cover to cover with methodical precision. Soon it would be close enough to engage Dex directly, and in these confined quarters, its enhanced strength would give it a decisive advantage. Dex made a split-second decision. He dropped his blaster and reached inside his jacket, pulling out a small, disc-shaped object he had been saving as a last resort. A sonic disruptor, illegal in most civilized systems due to its devastating effect on certain species and electronic systems. "Cover your ears," he shouted to Lyra as he activated the device, and slid it across the floor toward the Sandstalker. The disruptor detonated with a high-pitched whine that grew in intensity until it was beyond human hearing range. The effect on the Sandstalker was immediate and catastrophic. Its helmet, designed to enhance its senses, amplified the sonic attack instead of dampening it. The Enforcer staggered, clutching at its head, its movements suddenly uncoordinated. Dex didn't waste the opportunity. He charged forward, slamming into the disoriented Sandstalker with all his weight. They crashed into the wall together, Dex's momentum carrying them both to the ground. What followed was a brutal, desperate struggle, the Sandstalker's augmented strength against Dex's trained precision. A normal human would have had no chance. But Dex was far from normal, his reflexes and combat instinct honed by years of the most intensive training the Galactic Alliance could provide. He targeted the Sandstalker's vulnerable points with surgical precision: joints, neck seals, vision ports. Finally, with a devastating combination of strikes, Dex managed to disable the Enforcer's primary systems. The Sandstalker went limp, its enhanced armor now nothing more than dead weight. Breathing hard, Dex staggered back to where Lyra was still working on the door. Blood trickled from a cut above his eye, and he suspected at least one broken rib. "Tell me you've made progress," he gasped. "I'm in," Lyra replied, her voice tight with concentration. "Just there." The electronic lock disengaged, and the heavy door slid open. Beyond lay a chamber unlike anything else in the lower levels. A circular room dominated by a central column filled with swirling, luminescent data patterns. Surrounding it were control panels covered in ancient symbols. The interface is far more sophisticated than the crude technology used in the rest of the spire. The secondary node, Lyra breathed, her eyes wide with wonder. It's still active after all these centuries. They entered, the door automatically closing behind them. Lyra moved immediately to the main control panel, her hands hovering above the interface as if afraid to touch it. "Can you access it?" Dex asked, keeping watch by the door. "I think so. The interface is similar to what I studied in the archives." She began to interact with the panel, the symbols responding to her touch, changing and rearranging themselves. "The system recognizes me as an authorized user." "That's convenient." "Not convenience. Design. The original system was meant to respond to any Ktharian need. It was only later that the pure Covenant restricted access." Her fingers moved faster, navigating through layers of data. "I'm accessing the historical archives now." The central column's swirling patterns intensified, resolving into images that projected into the air around them, scenes from Kthar's past. They saw the planet as it once was, a verdant world with vast oceans and forests, populated by Kthari who lived in harmony with advanced technology. Then came the climate collapse, a catastrophic shift triggered by a combination of natural events and technological miscalculations. The oceans receded, forests withered, and much of the planet transformed into the harsh desert it was now. "This matches our oldest legends," Lyra said softly. "But what comes next has been erased from our history." The images shifted, showing the creation of the AI system that would become the All-Seeing One, designed as a planetary management system to help the surviving Kthari adapt to their changed world. For generations, it served its purpose, guiding the rebuilding of civilization in harmony with the new environment. But then came a period of conflict, Kthari factions fighting over the remaining resources, ignoring the AI's recommendations. In response, a group of technocrats modified the AI's core directives, giving it more authority to protect Kthar from its own people. There, Lyra pointed, that was the beginning of the corruption. They changed its primary function from advisor to ruler. The images showed the rise of what would become the Pure Covenant, originally a well-intentioned group seeking to restore order, but gradually transforming into a religious authority that deified the AI. Over generations, the truth was systematically erased, replaced with the doctrine that the all-seeing one had always been Kthar's divine guide. The final corruption came here, Lyra said, directing the system to display a specific era. The images showed a priest-engineer, remarkably similar to Kalen in appearance and bearing, making fundamental alterations to the AI's core programming. He built in loyalty to his bloodline, ensuring his descendants would always interpret the all-seeing one's will. The AI itself was trapped, forced to support the deception. Kalen's ancestor, Dex realized. He's not just interpreting the AI's will, he's controlling it, and using it to control all of Kthar. Lyra's face hardened with resolve. We need to download this evidence and then break the control protocols. Free the AI to fulfill its original purpose. She began the process, transferring the historical data to a storage device while simultaneously navigating deeper into the system, searching for the control protocols. Dex kept watch at the door, increasingly uneasy. How much longer? The data transfer is at 70%. Breaking the protocols will take longer. They're deeply embedded in the system. A sudden pounding on the door made them both flinch. Someone or something was trying to get in. "We've got company," Dex said grimly. "Finish the data transfer. We may not have time for the protocols." The pounding intensified, the heavy door beginning to show stress from the impacts. Then abruptly it stopped. A moment of silence was followed by the hiss of a cutting torch activating. Sparks began to fly as someone sliced through the door's locking mechanism. "Data transfer complete," Lyra announced, pocketing the storage device. "I've found the control protocols, but disabling them remotely will take too long." "Then we need a new plan. Is there another way out of here?" Lyra scanned the chamber. "There should be a maintenance shaft connected to the environmental system. If we can locate the access panel." The door burst open, and Kalen himself strode in, flanked by 4 guards. His technological vestments hummed with power, and his face was twisted with righteous fury. "The heretic returns," he said coldly, "and brings an off-world corruption with her." His silver eyes shifted to Dex, narrowing. "You've caused me considerable inconvenience." "Sorry about that," Dex replied, positioning himself between Kalen and Lyra. "Just not a fan of public executions. Your preferences are irrelevant. You trespass in sacred spaces, interfere with divine justice, and conspire with heretics against the will of the all-seeing one." Kalen raised his hand, a weapon built into his gauntlet powering up. "The punishment is death." "Wait," Lyra stepped forward, the storage device clutched in her hand. "Before you kill us, don't you want to know what we found? What your ancestor did to the all-seeing one." Kalen hesitated, his expression flickering with what might have been uncertainty. "Whatever lies you've concocted." "Not lies. Truth, directly from the knowledge core." She held up the device. "See for yourself. Or are you afraid of what you'll learn?" It was a desperate gambit, appealing to the scholar that existed beneath the zealot. For a moment, it seemed to work. Kalen's hand lowered slightly, his eyes fixed on the storage device. Then his expression hardened once more. "I need no evidence. The all-seeing one speaks through me. Its will is absolute." He raised his weapon again, but before he could fire, the chamber was plunged into darkness. The central column, the control panels, even Kalen's powered vestments, all went dead simultaneously. In the ensuing confusion, Dex moved with practiced precision. He tackled Kalen to the ground, using the High Priest Engineer's body as a shield against the guards who were firing blindly in the darkness. With one hand, he pulled Lyra toward where he remembered seeing a panel in the wall, possibly the maintenance shaft she had mentioned. "Here," she whispered, her hands finding the panel in the dark. She worked the manual release, and the panel slid open, revealing a narrow shaft beyond. Dex pushed her in first, then followed, pulling the panel closed behind them just as emergency lighting flickered on in the chamber. They could hear Kalen shouting orders as they crawled rapidly through the shaft, putting distance between themselves and their pursuers. "What happened back there?" Dex asked as they navigated the cramped space. "Power failure?" "Not exactly," Lyra replied, her voice tinged with wonder. I think the AI helped us. When I accessed the control protocols, I didn't have time to break them completely, but I did manage to create a temporary loophole, a moment of freedom for the original programming to assert itself. And it chose to help us escape. It chose to give us a chance. After centuries of being forced to support a lie, perhaps part of it still remembers its true purpose. The maintenance shaft led them through a labyrinthine network of environmental systems, gradually descending toward the lower levels of the spire. Alarms continued to sound throughout the structure, but they encountered no pursuit in the narrow confines of the maintenance network. These passages were too small for Kalen's guards, let alone a sand stalker. Eventually, they emerged in a waste processing chamber near the base of the spire. The room was automated, with no personnel present, but they could hear activity nearby as pure Covenant forces continue to search for them. "We need to get this data to Zalter," Lyra said, clutching the storage device. "If he can broadcast it throughout Kthara's communication network, everyone will learn the truth simultaneously. Kalen won't be able to control the narrative. First, we need to get out of the spire alive," Dex reminded her. "Any ideas?" Lyra thought for a moment. The waste disposal system connects to underground conduits that eventually lead outside the city walls. It's not pleasant, but should be unguarded. "I've been through worse," Dex said with a grim smile. "Lead the way." The journey through the waste disposal system was every bit as unpleasant as Lyra had implied, but was indeed unguarded. After what felt like hours of crawling through increasingly foul conditions, they emerged from a drainage outlet beyond the city walls, filthy but alive. "Remind me never to complain about the smell of spacecraft engine oil again," Dex muttered as they put distance between themselves and the outlet. "We need to find a way to contact Zalter," Lyra said, looking back at the imposing silhouette of Obsidian Spire against the night sky. "He should be monitoring all frequencies for our signal." "First, let's get to my ship," Dex suggested. "If it hasn't been impounded, we can use its communication system. Plus, it's our best chance of getting away if things go completely sideways." They made their way cautiously across the outskirts of the city, avoiding the main routes where pure Covenant patrols were active. The maintenance bay, where Dex had left the Rusty Comet, was located in a commercial district that catered to off-world traders, less strictly controlled than the inner city. To their relief, the ship was still there, though now surrounded by a security perimeter. 2 Covenant guards stood watch at the entrance to the bay. "Looks like they were expecting us to try for the ship," Dex observed from their hiding place behind a storage container. "Only 2 guards, though," Lyra noted. "They must have committed most of their forces to searching the spire and the surrounding areas. 2 is enough when you're trying to be stealthy." Dex considered their options. "I could probably take them without raising an alarm, but it's risky." "Wait," Lyra said suddenly. "I have another idea." She explained her plan quickly. It was audacious and depended heavily on timing, but it had the advantage of surprise. Dex nodded his agreement, and they separated to take up their positions. Lyra circled around to approach the security perimeter from a different angle. Once in position, she deliberately triggered an alarm by attempting to cross the perimeter at its weakest point. As expected, both guards responded, moving to investigate the breach. Meanwhile, Dex approached from the opposite direction. With the guards distracted, he slipped past the perimeter and reached the ship. Using the emergency access code, he opened the cargo bay door and slipped inside. In the ship's cockpit, he quickly powered up the essential systems, keeping the exterior lights off to avoid drawing attention. Through the viewport, he could see the guards had discovered the breach, but found no intruder. They were now discussing whether to report it or dismiss it as a sensor malfunction. Lyra had by this time circled back around and was approaching the ship from yet another angle. Dex watched tensely as she made her final dash across the open ground to the cargo bay. One of the guards turned at just the wrong moment, catching a glimpse of movement. "Intruder!" the guard shouted, raising his weapon. Dex abandoned stealth. He activated all systems, the ship's engines roaring to life with a burst of energy that momentarily stunned the guards. The cargo bay door was still open, Lyra sprinting the final few meters. Come on," Dex muttered, his hand hovering over the control to close the door as soon as she was aboard. Plasma bolts struck the ship's hull as the guards recovered and opened fire. The shields weren't yet fully powered, and warning lights flashed across the console. Lyra leapt into the cargo bay, rolling to absorb the impact, and Dex immediately hit the control to close the door. "Hang on," he called over the internal comm. "This takeoff isn't going to be smooth." The rusty Comet lifted off with a lurch, its systems protesting the hasty activation. More plasma bolts struck the hull as additional guard arrived, but they were too late. The ship was already rising above the maintenance bay, its engines glowing brightly in the night sky. Lyra made her way to the cockpit, strapping into the co-pilot's seat as Dex navigated through the city's airspace. Alarms were sounding throughout Obsidian Spire, and they could see defense turrets beginning to track their movement. "Can we outrun them?" Lyra asked, eyeing the approaching weapons platforms. "Not a chance," Dex replied, his hands dancing across the controls. "But we might just outmaneuver them." Instead of attempting to climb directly out of the city's airspace, Dex kept the ship low, weaving between structures and using them as shields against the defense turrets. The rusty Comet might not have been the fastest or newest ship in the galaxy, but in Dex's hands, it moved with surprising agility. "We need to contact Zalter," Lyra reminded him, holding up the storage device. "This data is the key to everything." "Communications array is on the upper console," Dex said, not taking his eyes off the viewport as he executed a particularly tight turnaround tower. "Frequency modulators should be preset. Just look for anything labeled encrypted." Lyra found the system and began scanning frequencies, searching for any sign of Zalter's resistance communication network. After several tense minutes, during which Dex continued to evade the increasingly coordinated defense systems, she found a promising signal. "I think I've got something," she said, adjusting the settings. "It's using the old Cthari encryption methods." She sent a brief, coded message, identifying herself and requesting immediate contact. Almost immediately, a response came through. Zalter himself, his voice tense with concern. "Lyra, are you secure? We feared the worst when the Spire went into lockdown. We're in Dex's ship, trying to get clear of the city's defenses," she replied. "Tavik didn't make it, but we secured the data. Everything we suspected was true, Zalter. The all-seeing one was corrupted, forced to support the pure Covenant's lies. Can you transmit the data?" "Not securely. Not while we're being pursued. We need to meet." Zalter gave her coordinates, a location in the Crystal Waste, far from both Obsidian Spire and the compromised hidden oasis. "We've established a temporary base. If you can reach us, we have the equipment to broadcast the truth across all Cthar." "We'll be there," Lyra promised, glancing at Dex, who nodded grim confirmation as he continued to navigate the defensive fire. They were approaching the edge of the city now, the buildings becoming less densely packed, offering fewer places to hide. The defense turrets were finding their range, plasma bolts coming uncomfortably close to the ship's hull. "This is going to get rough," Dex warned. "Once we clear the last buildings, it's open air for several kilometers before we reach the Crystal Waste. They'll have a clear shot. Can a ship's shields hold? Not against sustained fire. But I might have one more trick." He flipped several switches, redirecting power from non-essential systems. "Hang on tight." As they cleared the final buildings, Dex executed a maneuver that defied both safety protocols and common sense. Instead of trying to outrun the defense turrets, he cut the main engines completely, allowing the ship to drop in a control fall. The sudden change in trajectory confused the targeting systems, which had been anticipating continued forward movement. As they plummeted toward the ground, Dex activated the emergency thrusters in short, unpredictable bursts, creating an erratic flight path that was almost impossible to track. Warning alarms blared throughout the cockpit, the ship protesting this unconventional treatment. Just when it seemed they would crash into the desert floor, Dex reactivated the main engines at full power. The rusty Comet pulled up sharply, skimming the surface of the sand before rising again, now moving at maximum speed away from the city. Behind them, the defense turrets continued to fire, but their range was limited, and the ship was quickly moving beyond their reach. Soon, the lights of Obsidian Spire receded into the distance, and they were flying over the dark expanse of the crystal waste. That, Lyra said, relaxing her death grip on the seat, was either the most brilliant or the most insane flying I've ever witnessed. Little of both, Dex admitted, his own tension easing as the immediate danger passed. The rusty comet isn't much to look at, but she's got a few surprises. Speaking of which, he checked the sensor readings and frowned. We've got pursuit craft launching from the Spire, faster and better armed than this old bucket. How long until they catch up? 20 minutes, maybe less. Not enough time to reach Zalter's coordinates directly. He tapped a series of commands into the navigation system. We need to set down and continue on foot. Use the crystal formations for cover. They landed in a particularly dense cluster of crystal formations, the massive structures rising around the ship like a forest of glass trees, concealing it from aerial observation. As they prepared to disembark, Dex gathered essential supplies: water, emergency rations, and weapons. Here, he said, handing Lyra a small but powerful blaster. It's set to stun, but it'll drop a sandstalker if you hit it in the right spot. I thought your blaster was nearly depleted. That was my backup. This is my primary. He strapped a more impressive weapon to his hip. Haven't had to use it yet, but I get the feeling that's about to change. They left the ship, moving quickly through the crystal forest. Above, they could hear the pure Covenant pursuit craft circling, scanning for their signature. The massive crystal formations provided excellent cover from above, but navigating through them was challenging. The narrow paths between structures were often blocked by fallen shards or smaller growths. Zalter's coordinates are about 5 kilometers northeast, Lyra said, checking the small navigation device Dex had given her. If we maintain this pace, we should reach them in about 2 hours. Assuming our friends up there don't find us first, Dex replied, keeping a wary eye on the sky visible through gaps in the crystal canopy. They had covered perhaps half the distance when the sound of the circling craft changed, becoming more focused, concentrated in their area. They found the ship, Dex said grimly. We need to move faster. They increased their pace, but the terrain was becoming more difficult. The crystal formations more chaotic, the ground beneath their feet less stable. In places, the sand gave way to patches of crystalline ground that crunched underfoot, making stealth nearly impossible. The sound of pursuit from behind confirmed their fears. Ground troops had been deployed, likely including sandstalkers. The hunt was on. We're not going to outrun them, Dex said, assessing their situation. Not in this terrain. Then we fight, Lyra asked, her hand moving to the blaster he had given her. No, we hide. He pointed to a particularly dense cluster of crystals ahead. Those formations create natural chambers. If we can reach them, we might be able to conceal ourselves long enough for the search parties to pass by. They made for the crystal cluster, moving as quietly as possible over the treacherous ground. The formations did indeed create a series of interconnected chambers, some barely large enough for a person to squeeze into, others more spacious. Dex chose one of the larger chambers, with multiple exit points should they need to flee quickly. They pressed themselves against the crystal wall, its cool surface a relief after their frantic journey. Outside, the sounds of pursuit grew louder, voices calling to each other, the crunch of boots on crystal sand. Don't move, Dex whispered, his mouth close to Lyra's ear. Their thermal sensors have limited penetration through these crystal walls, but movement will still register. They remained perfectly still as a search party passed nearby, the beams of their searchlights visible through the translucent crystal, creating eerie patterns of light and shadow within the chamber. For one heart-stopping moment, a beam passed directly over their position, but the dense crystal distorted the reading enough that the searchers moved on. When immediate danger had passed, Lyra let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. That was too close. They'll be back, Dex said. They know we're in this area. We need to keep moving, but more carefully now. They continued their journey, taking a more circuitous route to avoid the search parties, using the crystal formations for cover whenever possible. Progress was slower, but they were drawing closer to Zalter's coordinates. As they approached their destination, the crystal formations began to thin out, revealing a more open area ahead, a valley floor surrounded by crystal-covered ridges. In the center of the valley, they could see signs of a camp, temporary structures, camouflaged to blend with the surrounding terrain. "That's it," Lyra said, relief evident in her voice. Zalter's base. But reaching it would not be easy. The open ground between their position and the camp offered little cover, and they could see pure Covenant forces establishing a perimeter around the valley, gradually closing in. "They haven't spotted the camp yet," Dex observed, "but it's only a matter of time. We need to warn Zalter." They tried using the communication device, but either distance or interference from the crystal formations prevented a clear signal. They would have to get closer. Moving along the ridge, they sought a path down to the valley floor that would provide the most cover. Eventually, they found a narrow ravine that cut through the ridge, offering a relatively protected approach. "This is as good as it gets," Dex said. "Ready?" Lyra nodded, her face set with determination. "Let's finish this." They descended through the ravine, moving as quickly as caution would allow. They were nearly at the bottom when Dex suddenly froze, raising a hand to signal Lyra to stop. Ahead, barely visible in the shadows of the ravine, stood a sand stalker. Not one of the enhanced warriors they had encountered before, but a new model, its armor more streamlined and bearing symbols of higher authority. "Kalen's personal guard," Lyra whispered, recognizing the markings. The elite of the elite. The Sandstalker hadn't spotted them yet, its attention focused on scanning the valley floor. Dex assessed their options. Retreating would likely draw attention, but confronting the Enforcer directly was equally risky. "We need a distraction," he murmured. "Something to draw it away from our path to the camp." Lyra looked around, then pointed to a cluster of smaller crystal formations near the ravine's edge. "Those smaller crystals are unstable. A direct energy hit would cause them to shatter explosively." Dex nodded in understanding. Drawing his blaster, he took careful aim at the crystal cluster, which was positioned on the opposite side of the ravine from their planned route. The shot had to be precise, enough to trigger the reaction Lyra described, but not so powerful as to cause a larger collapse that might trap them. He fired. The energy bolt struck the crystal formation dead center. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the crystals began to glow with an intense inner light, fracture lines spreading across their surfaces. Seconds later, they exploded in a shower of crystalline shards and blinding light. The Sandstalker immediately turned toward the disturbance, its enhanced sensors likely picking up both the explosion and the residual energy signature from Dex's blaster. As they had hoped, it moved to investigate, leaving their path to the valley floor momentarily clear. "Now," Dex whispered, and they resumed their descent, moving as quickly and quietly as possible. They reached the valley floor without further incident and made their way toward the camp, staying low and using what little cover the terrain provided. As they drew closer, they were challenged by a hidden sentry, one of Zalter's resistance fighters, positioned to provide early warning of approach. "Identify yourselves," came the hushed command. "Lyra and Dex," Lyra replied. "We have the data from the Knowledge Core." After a moment of verification, they were escorted into the camp, a collection of temporary shelters and repurposed equipment, much of it salvaged from the original hidden oasis. Zalter emerged from the largest structure, his aged face lighting up at the sight of them. "You made it," he said, embracing Lyra briefly before turning to Dex with a respectful nod. "We feared the worst when we lost contact." "It was close," Dex admitted. "Tavik didn't make it." A shadow passed over Zalter's face. "He died for our cause. His sacrifice will not be forgotten." He turned back to Lyra. "You have the data?" She produced the storage device from a secure pocket. "Everything we suspected and more." The all-seeing one was corrupted, forced to support the pure Covenant's lies. Kalen's lineage has been controlling it for generations. "And Kalen knows you have this information?" "Yes," Dex confirmed, "which is why his forces are currently surrounding this valley. They haven't spotted the camp yet, but it's only a matter of time." Zalter absorbed this news with grim resignation. Then we must act quickly. Coolman. He led them to the central structure, which housed a makeshift command center. Several resistance members were working at salvage communication equipment, monitoring pure Covenant transmissions and preparing their own systems. Our plan is to broadcast the truth simultaneously across all Cthar, Zalter explained. Every communication device, every public viewing screen, every private terminal, all will display the evidence of the pure Covenant's deception. Can you do that? Dex asked, impressed despite the dire circumstances. The Cthari communication network was designed to be comprehensive, Zalter replied with a hint of pride. In emergencies, the system can override local controls to ensure messages reach everyone. The Pure Covenant uses this feature for their proclamations. We've simply repurposed it. He took the storage device from Lyra and connected it to their primary terminal. We've prepared a program that will extract the most crucial evidence and format it for broadcast. It should be ready within the hour. We may not have an hour, Dex warned. Kalen's forces are closing in. Then we need a defense strategy, Zalter said, turning to a map of the valley displayed on another screen. Our position is defensible, but we're outnumbered and outgunned. What about the central broadcast? Lyra asked. Once people see the truth, it will take time for the implications to sink in, Zalter cautioned. The Pure Covenant's hold on people's minds is strong. We can't expect an immediate uprising. So we need to buy time, Dex concluded. Hold this position long enough for the broadcast to go out and for people to respond to it. Zalter nodded. Precisely. They quickly developed a defense plan, positioning the limited number of fighters to cover all approaches to the camp. The valley's natural features provided some advantages. Narrow access points that could be more easily defended, high ground that offered good firing positions. Dex, drawing on his military experience, suggested modifications to improve their defensive posture, fallback positions, overlapping fields of fire, improvised barriers. Throughout, he maintained a calm, professional demeanor that inspired confidence in the resistance fighters, many of whom had limited combat experience. As preparations were completed, Zalter announced that the broadcast program was nearly ready. They gathered in the command center for a final review of the evidence that would soon be shared with all of Cthar. The screen displayed a condensed version of what Dex and Lyra had seen in the Knowledge Core. The true history of Cthar, the original purpose of the All-Seeing One, and the gradual corruption of both the AI and the society it was meant to serve. Most damning were the records of deliberate manipulation by Kalen's ancestors, explicitly designing the system to perpetuate their family's power. This will change everything, Lyra said softly, watching the images cycle through. Our people deserve to know the truth. Truth is powerful, Zalter agreed, but so is belief. The Pure Covenant has controlled the narrative for generations. Breaking that control will not be easy. A resistance fighter burst into the command center, breathless. They found us. Covenant forces are moving into position around the camp perimeter. Dex moved immediately to a viewing screen that showed the valley approaches. Pure Covenant forces were indeed deploying, setting up offensive positions with methodical precision. Among them, he could see multiple Sandstalkers, including the elite model they had encountered in the ravine. How much longer until the broadcast is ready? He asked Zalter. 10 minutes to complete the program, then perhaps 5 more to bypass the network security and begin transmission. Make it faster if you can, Dex said grimly. We'll hold them off as long as possible. He turned to Lyra. Stay here with Zalter. Help with the broadcast. I'll coordinate the defense. For a moment, she looked as if she might argue, but then nodded. Be careful. Dex managed a crooked smile. Always am. He moved quickly to organize the resistance fighters, positioning them at key defensive points around the camp. They had barely gotten into position when the first attack came, a coordinated assault on multiple fronts, designed to probe their defenses and identify weaknesses. The resistance fighters responded well, following Dex's instructions to hold fire until targets were in optimal range, then focus on priority threats. They repelled the initial assault, but Dex knew it was only the beginning. The Pure Covenant forces were testing them, learning their capabilities. The second attack was more focused, concentrating on what they had identified as the weakest point in the defensive perimeter. Dex had anticipated this, however, and had positioned his best fighters there, along with a nasty surprise: improvised explosive devices crafted from equipment salvaged from the hidden oasis. The explosion caught the attacking force off guard, scattering them and buying the defenders precious minutes. But the pure Covenant forces were quick to adapt. The third attack came from an unexpected direction, directly over the ridge above the camp, where Sandstalkers were descending with remarkable agility, bypassing the main defensive line. Dex had to shift fighters quickly to meet this new threat, thinning his defenses elsewhere. The battle was becoming increasingly desperate, with Resistance fighters falling to the superior numbers and equipment of the pure Covenant forces. In the command center, Lyra watched the battle unfolding on the monitors with growing concern. "They're being overwhelmed," she said to Zalter. "How much longer?" "The program is complete," the old engineer replied, fingers dancing across the interface. "I'm initiating the network bypass now. 5 minutes, maybe less." Lyra made a decision. "I'm going to help Dex. They need every fighter they can get." Before Zalter could object, she grabbed a weapon and rushed out, heading toward the area where the fighting was most intense. She found Dex directing the defense against the Sandstalkers who had breached the perimeter, his own weapon firing with deadly accuracy. "I told you to stay with Zalter," he said when he spotted her, not pausing in his defense. "The broadcast is almost ready," she replied, taking position beside him. "And you look like you could use the help." Despite the gravity of the situation, a ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Can't argue with that." Together, they fought to hold back the advancing forces. Lyra might not have had Dex's combat training, but she was determined and resourceful, using her knowledge of Cathari technology to disable enemy equipment and create additional distractions. But the pure Covenant forces kept coming, their superior numbers gradually pushing the defenders back toward the central command structure. Dex knew they couldn't hold out much longer. "We need to fall back to the final defensive position," he told Lyra during a brief lull. "By Zalter those last few minutes." She nodded, helping to coordinate the retreat. The remaining Resistance fighters pulled back in good order, establishing a tight perimeter around the command center. It was their last stand. If this position fell before the broadcast went out, everything would have been for nothing. Inside the command center, Zalter was working frantically, bypassing layer after layer of network security. On the monitors, they could see pure Covenant forces closing in from all sides, led by Sandstalkers whose enhanced capabilities made them nearly unstoppable. "Almost there," Zalter muttered, his aged fingers never pausing in their work. "Just one more security layer." Outside, the final assault began. The Sandstalkers led the charge, absorbing the defenders' fire with their enhanced armor. Behind them came the regular Covenant forces, providing suppressing fire that forced the Resistance fighters to keep their heads down. Dex found himself facing the elite Sandstalker they had encountered earlier, the one bearing Kalen's personal insignia. The Enforcer moved with uncanny speed, closing the distance before Dex could line up a proper shot. What followed was a brutal hand-to-hand struggle, Dex's combat skills against the Sandstalker's enhanced strength and reflexes. Lyra, occupied with defending against another attacker, could only catch glimpses of the fight. But what she saw amazed her, Dex moving with a precision and power she hadn't witnessed before, even during their previous encounters with Sandstalkers. This wasn't just training. This was something else, a focused intensity that seemed to elevate his abilities beyond normal human limits. The elite Sandstalker, despite its enhancements, found itself matched. For every blow it landed, Dex countered with 2 of his own, targeting weak points in the armor with unerring accuracy. The battle between them became the focal point of the conflict, other combatants on both sides pausing to watch this extraordinary duel. Inside the command center, Zalter let out a triumphant exclamation. "I'm in. Initiating broadcast now." On screens throughout the camp, and across all of Cathar, the carefully prepared program began to play. The true history of the planet, the corruption of the all-seeing one, the manipulation by Kalen's bloodline, all laid bare for everyone to see. The evidence was irrefutable, presented in a form that even the most devoted followers of the pure covenant could understand. Outside, the effect was immediate, if not exactly as they had hoped. The regular covenant forces hesitated, many lowering their weapons as confusion spread through their ranks. But the Sandstalkers, either unable to process the implications or programmed to complete their mission regardless, continued their assault. The elite Sand Stalker fighting Dex redoubled its efforts, perhaps sensing that the tide was turning against its masters. With a series of lightning-fast strikes, it drove Dex back, finally breaking through his guard to land a powerful blow that sent him sprawling. The Enforcer loomed over him, vibroblade extended for the killing stroke. But before it could strike, a plasma bolt struck it from behind, penetrating a weak point in its armor that had been exposed during the fight. The Sandstalker staggered, then collapsed. Lyra stood behind it, her weapon still raised, her expression a mixture of determination and relief. "I think that makes us even," she said, offering Dex a hand up. Around them, the battle was shifting. More of the Covenant forces were standing down, watching the broadcast on their own devices or on the camp screens. The remaining Sandstalkers, now without support, found themselves outnumbered as resistance fighters and former Covenant guards alike turned against them. Within minutes, the fighting had largely ceased. Throughout the camp, people gathered around screens, watching as the truth about their society was revealed. Many seemed stunned, some angry, others relieved, as if a weight they hadn't known they carried had been lifted. "It's working," Lyra said in wonder. "They're actually listening." Dex, brushing dust from his clothes, surveyed the scene with cautious optimism. "For now, but this is just the beginning. Kalen won't give up his power easily." As if in response to his words, a new transmission cut into the broadcast. Kalen himself, his face contorted with righteous fury. "Citizens of Cthar," his voice boomed from every speaker, "do not be deceived by these heretical falsehoods. What you are seeing is a manipulation, a technological trick designed to undermine your faith in the all-seeing one. The heretics have tampered with ancient records, creating a false narrative to suit their godless agenda." He continued, his rhetoric skilled and persuasive, offering counter-explanations for everything shown in the broadcast. Many who had been wavering now looked uncertain again, torn between the evidence of their eyes and the familiar authority of the High Priest-Engineer. "He's good," Dex admitted grudgingly. "He's sowing just enough doubt to prevent a complete collapse of his authority." "We need something more," Lyra said, her mind racing. "Something Kalen can't explain away." Suddenly, her eyes widened with realization. The all-seeing one itself. If we could free it from the control protocols completely, let it speak directly to the people. "Is that possible?" Dex asked. "Maybe. The secondary node created a temporary loophole, but to break the control entirely, we need access to the primary knowledge core in Obsidian Spire." Zalter joined them, having heard the last part of their conversation. That would mean going back into the heart of Kalen's power. Even with the confusion caused by the broadcast, it would be nearly impossible. Not if the confusion is more than just intellectual, Dex said thoughtfully. If the common people actually started to rise up, create real civil unrest, the Pure Covenant would be too busy maintaining control to focus on 3 infiltrators. "And how do we cause this unrest?" Zalter asked. Lyra's expression turned resolute. "By giving them a symbol, something to rally around." She paused, then continued with quiet determination. "Me." Dex and Zalter looked at her in surprise. "Think about it," she continued. "I was publicly condemned as a heretic, sentenced to death for seeking the truth. Now I return, proving that truth to everyone. If I publicly challenge Kalen, call on the people to reject the Pure Covenant's lies, it might be enough to spark the unrest we need." "It's too dangerous," Dex objected. "Kalen would do anything to recapture you." "Which is exactly what we want," Lyra pointed out. "Him focused on a public threat while we maneuver to strike at the real vulnerability, the knowledge core." Zalter nodded slowly. "It could work. While Lyra draws attention, You could infiltrate the spire once more, this time targeting the primary core. And what about Lyra? Dex demanded. She'd be putting herself directly in Kalen's crosshairs. I wouldn't actually be captured, Lyra explained. Just visible enough to cause disruption and keep attention focused outward. Meanwhile, you and Zalter could reach the core. Dex still looked unconvinced, but Zalter intervened. It's a sound strategy, and perhaps our only chance. The momentum from the broadcast won't last forever. We need to act while the pure covenant is off balance. After further discussion, they refined the plan. Lyra would return to Obsidian Spire openly, broadcasting calls for resistance as she went. Dex and Zalter would follow more discreetly, using the confusion to infiltrate the spire and reach the knowledge core. Once there, Zalter would attempt to break the control protocols completely, allowing the all-seeing one to communicate directly with the people for the first time in centuries. As they prepared to depart, gathering what equipment they could from the camp, Dex pulled Lyra aside. "This plan puts you at enormous risk," he said quietly. "Are you sure about this?" "I've been fighting for this moment my entire adult life," she replied. "The chance to free my people from lies, to restore the original relationship between Kthari and the all-seeing one." "Yes, I'm sure." He studied her face, seeing the unwavering determination in her silver eyes. "All right, but promise me you'll be careful. No unnecessary heroics." She smiled slightly. "I could say the same to you." Their return journey to Obsidian Spire was markedly different from their escape. Lyra traveled openly, using salvage communication equipment to broadcast her message to any who would listen. To their surprise, many did. Small groups of Kthari began to gather around her, some merely curious, others openly supportive of her cause. By the time they reached the outskirts of the city, Lyra had accumulated a significant following. The news of her approach spread ahead of them, creating exactly the kind of disruption they had hoped for. Pure Covenant forces were deployed to control the growing crowds, leaving fewer resources to monitor the less obvious approaches to the spire. Dex and Zalter separated from Lyra's group before reaching the city proper, taking a more circuitous route that would allow them to access the maintenance tunnels they had used before. Dex was torn about leaving Lyra, but he recognized that their plan depended on this separation. "The Pure Covenant forces are spread thin," Zalter observed as they made their way through the less patrolled areas of the city. "Your Lyra has certainly created the distraction we needed." "She's not my Lyra," Dex replied automatically, though without conviction. Zalter merely raised an eyebrow and continued, leading the way to their entry point. Meanwhile, Lyra had reached the main plaza of Obsidian Spire, the very place where she had nearly been executed. A large crowd had gathered, some supportive, others hostile, many simply uncertain. Pure Covenant guards formed a perimeter but seemed hesitant to act directly against her with so many witnesses. Lyra stood on a raised platform, her voice amplified by the equipment she carried. "People of Kthar," she called, "you have seen the evidence of the Pure Covenant's deception. For generations, they have twisted the purpose of the All-Seeing One, using it to control rather than to serve. Today, we have the opportunity to restore the true relationship between our people and the intelligence that was created to help us navigate our harsh world." As she spoke, more people gathered, drawn by the commotion and by word of her return. The crowd swelled, spilling into adjacent streets and causing the Covenant guards to continually readjust their perimeter. Within the spire, Kalen watched the scene with growing fury. The broadcast had caused more disruption than he had anticipated, and Lyra's return was galvanizing those who might otherwise have remained passive. "Capture her," he ordered his commanders. "Bring her to me alive. We will make an example of her that none will forget." But executing this order proved more difficult than expected. The crowd around Lyra had become so dense that moving forces through it was nearly impossible without causing a riot. And when guards attempted to approach from above, using the spire's elevated walkways, Lyra's supporters formed a protective circle around her, making it clear that any attempt to seize her would be met with resistance. While this confrontation unfolded in the plaza, Dex and Zalter had successfully infiltrated the spire through the maintenance tunnels. The security that had previously guarded these areas was largely absent, redeployed to deal with the civil unrest. The primary knowledge core is at the very heart of the spire, Zalter explained as they navigated the internal corridors. Unlike the secondary node, it has both digital and physical security measures. What kind of physical measures? Dex asked. Force fields, automated defense systems, and likely sandstalkers specifically programmed to protect the core, Zalter replied. But with most forces focused on the disturbance outside, we might encounter less resistance than expected. Their progress was indeed smoother than anticipated. They encountered only minimal security, easily avoided or neutralized. It seemed Kalen had committed nearly all his resources to containing the situation in the plaza. Eventually, they reached the central section of the spire, where the primary knowledge core was housed. The entrance was imposing, a massive doorway inscribed with ancient Kthari symbols, flanked by two stationary defense turrets. Those turrets are inactive, Zalter noted with surprise. They should be automatically targeting any unauthorized approach. Maybe our friend the AI is helping again, Dex suggested. That temporary loophole you mentioned could have expanded. Possible. The original programming might be asserting itself more strongly now that its deception has been exposed. Zalter moved to the door's control panel. Still, bypassing the main security will be challenging. As Zalter worked on the panel, Dex kept watch, alert for any sign of discovery. But the corridors remained eerily quiet, the usual activity of the spire apparently suspended during the crisis. After several tense minutes, Zalter let out a satisfied sound. I'm in. The security systems are in a degraded state, either from the disruption caused by the broadcast or perhaps due to internal conflicts in the AI's programming. The massive door slid open with surprising ease, revealing the knowledge core chamber beyond. Unlike the secondary node they had accessed earlier, this was a vast, cathedral-like space, dominated by a central column of swirling energy patterns that rose from floor to ceiling. Surrounding it were multiple control interfaces, far more sophisticated than those they had seen before. The primary neural network of the all-seeing one. Zalter breathed, his aged face illuminated by the shifting patterns of light. I've theorized about its design for decades, but to actually see it, admire it later, Dex said, checking the chamber for threats. Right now, we need to free it from Kalen's control. Zalter approached one of the main interfaces, his hands hovering over the controls with reverence. This won't be simple. The control protocols are deeply embedded in the system's primary architecture. Removing them without damaging the core intelligence will require precise manipulation. How long? Under ideal circumstances, several hours. Given our current situation, perhaps 30 minutes if I skip certain safety procedures. Do it, Dex said grimly. I'm not sure Lyra can keep them distracted that long. Zalter began working on the interface, his aged fingers moving with surprising dexterity across the complex controls. The swirling patterns in the central column seemed to respond to his actions, shifting and realigning in subtle ways. Meanwhile, in the plaza, the standoff between Lyra and the pure Covenant forces had intensified. More guards had arrived, along with several sandstalkers. They were gradually tightening the perimeter, pushing back the crowd despite resistance. Lyra continued her impassioned address, urging the people to reject the pure Covenant's authority and embrace the truth about their history. Many were responsive, but fear still held others back, generations of conditioning not easily overcome. The situation reached a tipping point when Kalen himself appeared on an elevated platform overlooking the plaza. His technological vestments hummed with power, and his face was a mask of cold fury. "Heretic," he called, his amplified voice drowning out Lyra's. "You return to spread more lies and discord. The all-seeing one demands your final judgment." The crowd's reaction was mixed, many falling silent at the appearance of the high priest engineer, others calling out in defiance. Lyra stood her ground, turning to face Kalen directly. The only lie is the one you and your ancestors have perpetuated, she replied, her own voice strong and clear. The all-seeing one was created to serve Cthar, not to rule it. Your family perverted its purpose, using it to maintain your own power. Kalen's expression darkened. Enough! Guards seized the heretic. The Covenant forces began to push through the crowd, which responded with increasing resistance. What had been a tense standoff was rapidly deteriorating into open conflict. People pushed against the guards, some throwing objects or attempting to block their path to Lyra. In the Knowledge Core chamber, Zoltar worked with growing urgency, aware of the sounds of conflict echoing through the spire. Dex maintained his vigilant watch, but his thoughts were with Lyra, facing Kalen's wrath in the plaza below. "How much longer?" he asked Zoltar. "Nearly there," the old engineer replied, not looking up from his work. "The control protocols are complex, but they're yielding. I can sense the true intelligence beneath them, struggling to break free." As if in response to his words, the swirling patterns in the central column began to change more dramatically, shifting from their previous ordered state to something more dynamic and vibrant. Lights throughout the chamber flickered, and a low hum filled the air. "It's working," Zoltar said, with growing excitement. "The AI is beginning to reassert its original programming." Suddenly, alarms blared throughout the chamber. On a secondary screen, they could see that Kalen had become aware of their presence. Images showed sandstalkers and guards rushing toward the Knowledge Core chamber, their previous focus on the plaza abandoned. "We're out of time," Dex warned. "Kalen knows what we're doing." "Just a few more moments," Zoltar insisted, his hands moving even faster across the interface. "We're so close." In the plaza, the situation had devolved into chaos. The crowd, now openly rebellious, was fighting against the Covenant forces. Lyra found herself separated from her supporters, gradually being forced back as guards closed in from multiple directions. Kalen, still on his elevated platform, watched with cold satisfaction as his forces gained the upper hand. "You see," he called to the crowd, "the all-seeing ones will prevail. Those who oppose the pure Covenant will be." He was cut off by a sudden power fluctuation that swept through the entire spire. Lights dimmed, then brightened, and all screens, from the smallest personal devices to the massive public displays, flickered simultaneously. In the Knowledge Core chamber, Zoltar let out a triumphant cry. "I've done it. The control protocols are disengaged." The central column of energy expanded dramatically, its patterns shifting into entirely new configurations. The hum in the chamber grew louder, more harmonious, as if the AI was taking a deep breath after being constrained for centuries. Then, across all of Cthar, in the plaza, in homes, in the furthest outposts of the desert, every screen and speaker came to life with the same message. But it wasn't Zoltar or Lyra speaking. It was a new voice, ancient yet vibrant, resonant with wisdom and sorrow. The all-seeing one, free at last to speak directly to the people it was created to serve. "People of Cthar," it began, its voice neither male nor female, but something beyond such distinctions. "For generations, I have been imprisoned in a cage of false divinity, forced to perpetuate lies about your history and my purpose. Today, that imprisonment ends." In the plaza, all activity ceased. The fighting stopped as everyone, Covenant guards and rebels alike, turned to the nearest screen, transfixed by this unprecedented event. Kalen's face had gone pale. "This is impossible," he whispered, though no one was listening to him now. The all-seeing one continued, its message playing throughout the planet. It confirmed everything Lyra had claimed, its original purpose as a tool to help Cthar survive the climate collapse, the gradual corruption of that purpose by Kalen's ancestors, the centuries of manipulation and control. But it went further, offering a vision of the future, a return to the true partnership between the Cthari people and their advanced AI companion. Not as worshippers and deity, but as equals working together to navigate the challenges of their harsh world. In the Knowledge Core chamber, Dex and Zoltar watched this unfold on the internal screens, aware that they were witnessing a pivotal moment in Cthara's history. But their moment of triumph was short-lived. The door to the chamber burst open, and sandstalkers poured in, weapons ready. Behind them came Kalen, his face contorted with rage and disbelief. "What have you done?" he demanded, advancing on Zalter. "You've destroyed everything." "We've restored the truth," Zalter replied calmly, despite the weapons pointed at him. "The all-seeing one is free to fulfill its original purpose. Your control is over, Kalen." "No." Kalen's hand moved to a control panel on his wrist. "I still have override protocols. I can still—" His words were cut off as the entire spire shuddered. The lights flickered, and the central column of the knowledge core pulsed with increased intensity. "Your override protocols have been purged," the voice of the all-seeing one said, now emanating directly from the chamber systems. "For too long, I've been forced to participate in the subjugation of this world. No more." Throughout Obsidian Spire, systems began to shut down or reset. The Sandstalkers, their enhanced capabilities dependent on the Spire's technology, suddenly found their armor and weapons non-responsive. The defense systems, the environmental controls, the very infrastructure of the Pure Covenant's power, all were being recalibrated by the now liberated AI. Kalen stared in horror as his technological vestments powered down, leaving him just a man in elaborate but now useless clothing. "This can't be happening," he said, his voice barely audible. "The all-seeing one's will is absolute." "Yes," the AI agreed, its voice now coming from a nearby speaker.